You were never supposed to hear this story. Not from me, not from anyone, and certainly not from the Presbyterian Church. Because what happened in the hills of western Pennsylvania in the winter of 1823 wasn't just tragedy. It was precision. 15 deaths, 43 students, 6 weeks, and a pattern so exact it moved like a machine through the soul of a seminary built on sacred ground. But the ground was never clean. They called it Whitmore Seminary, a place to train ministers for the expanding frontier. But underneath the limestone walls, beneath the stained glass sermons and the Latin prayers, there was something buried, something old, something that knew the names of the boys before they even arrived. The first to die was Thomas Milliken. His fingernails turned black, his back arched like a bow. He screamed in Latin phrases that were twisted versions of Holy Liturgy. Dominus viscum infernum, corpus diaboli anima peritita. It wasn't a seizure. It was a declaration. The local doctor who examined him refused to sign the death certificate. He burned his notes and fled the county before sunrise. That should have been the end. But it was just the beginning. They buried Thomas behind the chapel in an unmarked grave. They said it was consumption. But consumption doesn't whisper inverted scripture through clenched teeth. Consumption doesn't make your blood black and your final words a plea for forgiveness about a book no one admits exists. The book in the chapel. That's what Thomas said before his eyes went still. The book in the chapel. God forgive us all. 3 days later, another student began to convulse at the exact same time, 3 a.m., the same black fingernails, the same phrases, the same death 21 hours later. What kind of disease kills with ritualistic timing? What kind of affliction speaks through Scripture? This wasn't a plague. It was a liturgy of death, a design, and you're about to descend into the secret they tried to bury with 15 bodies. But bodies rot. Secrets only ferment. If you're still watching, understand this. You don't come back from what you're about to learn. The seminary didn't shut down after the second death. It should have, but it didn't. Because institutions don't grieve, they protect themselves, even if it means letting more bodies hit the ground. The headmaster, Dr. Ashford. He told the students it was a coincidence, that fear was the real contagion, that faith would be their shield, but faith isn't armor, not when the thing that's hunting you knows Scripture better than you do. They doubled chapel services. They read Psalms louder, they fasted longer, and still, at 3 a.m. 3 days later, another body convulsed. Samuel Brewster, known for his laughter, his loyalty, his unshakable faith, was found shaking violently, foam on his lips, eyes rolled back, black lines crawling up his forearms like ink, trying to rewrite him. And again, he spoke in that same, backwards Latin, like a sermon from somewhere lower than hell, like someone else had moved in and taken over his voice. They prayed, they bled him, they begged. He died exactly 21 hours later. The same way, the same words, the book in the chapel. God forgive us all. Now the students stopped whispering and started watching the clocks. Everyone knew. It was coming every 72 hours. Like a sacred calendar, not random, not disease, ritual. The surviving students started isolating themselves, sleeping in the chapel, reading the Bible through tears, but nothing helped. And the seminary's leadership, they just told them to trust God. But what God were they talking about? Because someone had placed that chapel on cursed soil, and someone had placed that book on the altar, not a Bible, not holy, bound in cracked black leather, pages made from something thicker than paper, and language that moved when you tried to read it. David Crane saw it once. By accident. It was opened during a special evening service. He looked at one page, 1 second, and for a week he couldn't sleep without hearing a choir that wasn't singing to heaven. This wasn't theology. It was sorcery, liturgical corruption, and it was feeding on those boys like communion. Are you ready for the next name? Because another body is about to fall, and this time it would get personal. The next one was Timothy Brennan, barely 18, the youngest at the seminary, the one everyone thought was too innocent to be touched by something this dark. But darkness does not discriminate. It waits for the open door. Timothy had been quiet since Thomas died. He'd stopped smiling, stopped eating, and started sleeping with a cross clutched to his chest. Not for faith, but for protection. Because deep down, even he knew, whatever was hunting them didn't care about God. On December 15th, right on time, 3 a.m., the screaming started again. His roommate found him thrashing, eyes wide open, but unseeing, blood at the corners of his mouth, black slime oozing from his ears. And then the chanting started. Not Latin this time, something older, something no one recognized. The sounds felt ancient, like the syllables themselves predated human language. Sarah Ashford came running with her mother, the only women in that cursed place. Margaret froze. But Sarah didn't. She stepped forward, held Timothy's hand, whispered a psalm into his ear. But instead of calming him, the chanting grew louder, and he gripped her wrist so tightly she screamed. When they pried his hand loose, her skin was burned, as if fire had passed through his veins into hers. Timothy died 21 hours later, like the rest, and the message was the same, the book in the chapel, God forgive us all. But this time, something changed. Sarah became withdrawn, her eyes distant, like she had heard something in that boy's final scream, something the others couldn't. She stopped attending meals, locked herself in the library, and began copying pages from ancient texts, including ones the seminary never admitted to owning. Her father grew concerned, but he was too late. Sarah had seen the book, not just the outside, not just one page. She had read it, and whatever was in there, it had seen her back. Now it wasn't just taking students, it was rewriting them, one by one, like Nam is in a cursed genealogy. David Crane started having the dreams again, the choir, the chanting, the chapel flooded in blood, and always the sound of the same voice whispering one phrase over and over. The debt must be paid. The debt must be paid. The debt must be paid. But no one knew what the debt was, or who had signed it. Yet deep in the shadows, one figure did, and soon that figure would be forced into the light. It was David Crane who found the journal, hidden behind a false panel in the chapel pulpit, a hollow compartment, crafted with such precision that it had escaped notice for decades. But the wood had started to crack, like the building itself wanted to confess. Inside, wrapped in rotting linen, was a leather-bound book. Not the Bible, not a sermon journal, but something else entirely. The leather was human. That much David felt in his bones. The cover was etched with strange symbols, not carved, burned, and the pages smelled like sulfur and salt, like the earth had rejected them. The entries were written in a mix of Latin, Aramaic, and something he couldn't identify. But he recognized the handwriting on the first page. Dr. Ashford, the head of the seminary, the man they all trusted, the man who had brought them here. The first entry was dated 1818, a year before the seminary was even built. It described a ritual, not a dedication ceremony, but a covenant, a pact. Ashford had written that the land was consecrated, not to God, but to something older, something buried beneath the limestone hills of Pennsylvania, something that demanded blood, for knowledge, for power, for protection. The seminary. Whitmore wasn't just a school. It was an altar, a machine built to groom sacrifices. Under the guise of spiritual training, David dropped the journal like it burned him. And maybe it did, because his fingers throbbed with a heat that pulsed into his veins. He backed away from the pulpit, shaking, sweating. Everything he thought he knew about this place, about Ashford, about the church, was rotting at the center. He ran to Sarah, demanded answers. But she was already waiting for him, sitting by the fire, the journal's twin on her lap. Yes, there was more than one. She didn't flinch, didn't deny it, just looked at him with those hollow eyes and said, "You were supposed to find it. You were chosen." David didn't ask what that meant, because part of him already knew. The dreams, the whispers, the feeling that something had been pulling him toward this place since childhood. It wasn't coincidence. It was inheritance. The church didn't train ministers here. It bred offerings, and 15 was the number required. 15 souls, bound in silence, one for each chapter of the book. Only one chapter remained unwritten, his. 3 more students died before the journal ever left David's hands, each one claimed by the same horrifying pattern, each death more violent, more grotesque. The seminary began to rot from the inside, and still no one dared leave. The letters home were censored by Dr. Ashford himself, claiming snow made travel impossible, claiming the deaths were isolated, that prayer would see them through. But the truth was, he had already made his peace with what must happen. David knew, because the journal revealed the pattern every 27 years. The land required a renewal, a ritual. 15 chosen men, educated, obedient, spiritually open, made pure by isolation and guilt and sacrifice. The seminary was built as a channel, an architectural sigil, every hallway, every doorway, every window, aligned with purpose, to trap energy, to focus fear, to feed something ancient beneath the chapel floor. The thing they called God in their prayers was listening. But it wasn't the God they thought. It was older, hungrier, a being described in forgotten texts as Anaphaxiton, a name whispered once in the apocryphal writings of the Gnostics, a name that predates the cross, a name that eats faith. David couldn't sleep, not because of the nightmares, but because he could feel it watching him, even when his eyes were open, especially then. Sarah stopped pretending. She began reciting phrases from the journal during chapel. Her father didn't stop her. He joined in. The students didn't notice at first. The Latin sounded familiar, but it twisted, like wine turned to vinegar, and the prayers no longer ended in amen, but something else, something guttural, something that made their ears ring and their stomachs twist. David tried to leave, but the roads were snowed in, and when he tried the woods, the trees shifted. Every turn led him back to the chapel, like the forest itself had been bound to the ritual. So he went to the graves, all 13 unmarked, except now each had a symbol carved into the soil, not by hand, but by something crawling underneath. The last 2 deaths, Timothy Brennan and Peter Cunningham, happened within minutes of each other. Timothy choked on his own tongue. Peter tore at his chest until his heart stopped, and both whispered the same phrase with their last breath. "He's almost here." Only David remained, and now the journal pulsed, as if it had a heartbeat, matching his own. David locked himself in the seminary library. For 2 days, he didn't eat, didn't sleep, didn't speak, only read. He searched every ancient commentary, every forbidden marginalia, every volume hidden behind the false panel in the theology wing. And that's when he found it. A sermon preached in 1702 by Reverend Josiah Whitmore himself, the namesake of the seminary, the founder, and the first to bind it beneath the chapel floor. The sermon was never meant to be read. It was encoded in Latin and Hebrew, disguised as liturgy. But David had studied both, and he broke the cipher. The truth staggered him. The land was already cursed, long before the church came. The Lenape elders had warned colonial settlers not to build on that hill. They said it was where the earth opened its mouth, where spirits that walk backward whispered madness into men. The settlers ignored them. And every 27 years since, 15 men had died, not at random, but offered. Josiah Whitmore had learned the ritual from a French theologian exiled from the Sorbonne, a man obsessed with the Nephilim, the Watchers, and what lay beneath the veil of Christian doctrine. Whitmore's notes described a spiritual formula, a construction of fear, pain, and obedience that summoned power in exchange for purity. The seminary was never meant to train ministers. It was a womb, a breeding ground for sacrifice. And Dr. Ashford had known all along. David tore the sermon from the book and burned it. But the flames turned blue, and the smoke curled into letters he couldn't read. That night, he found Sarah waiting for him in the chapel. She was barefoot, eyes black, mouth smiling too wide. She handed him the journal, not the one he'd been reading. Another one, older, bound in skin that pulsed with its own rhythm. She spoke without moving her lips, and David heard the words not with his ears, but in the bones of his skull. You are the final one. You were always meant to remember, to survive, to tell the tale and make it real. Then she walked into the pulpit and whispered the last word of the ritual, a word that David will not repeat, not in any of his letters, not even now. The chapel shook, the walls cracked, the stained glass melted into black syrup, and something rose from the floor beneath her feet. A column of smoke, with limbs. David ran. He never looked back. He made it to the edge of the woods just as the chapel collapsed behind him, not like a building failing from age or fire, but like a mouth closing, sealing something back inside, something that wasn't supposed to be seen. David didn't stop running until dawn. His shoes were gone, his coat torn, his skin scratched by thorns and frost. But his mind, that was the worst part. It felt invaded, like there were still words in him that hadn't been said, thoughts he couldn't trace back to himself. He kept hearing Sarah's voice, not in memory, but now, present, breathing down his spine. You survived because we needed you to, she would whisper. You are the witness. You are the echo. You are the infection. When he reached Millbrook, no one believed him. Not the sheriff, not the local pastor, not even Dr. Whitley, who had also fled and was drinking himself to death in the attic of the town's general store. David was put in the care of a distant uncle in Baltimore, and for 2 decades he said nothing. But in 1845, he wrote a letter, then another, then dozens, pages and pages, all addressed to a name that doesn't appear on any registry. Father Eliah Ward, Jesuit order. Only one letter was ever found, buried inside the spine of a theological dictionary in the closed stacks of the University of Chicago. No one knows how it got there. That letter describes the entire ritual, the symbolism, the math, the reason the number was always 15, and why it had to be young men with conviction. According to the letter, each of them represented a piece of the chain: faith, doubt, reason, obedience, joy, grief, pride, submission, sacrifice, silence, memory, will, fire, flesh. And the final one, remorse. David was the last. Remorse binds the ritual. He wasn't spared because he was lucky. He was spared because without someone to regret, the chain can't hold. But here's the part no one was supposed to read. Every 27 years, it must begin again, because the entity beneath the seminary doesn't feed, it listens. And if it's not spoken to, it wakes, it walks. Now listen closely, because this is the part that matters. If you've made it this far, you've heard its name in the spaces between these words. You've seen its shape in the pauses of your breath. So comment this phrase twice. The chain has 13 links. Do it now, not for engagement, for protection. The seminary never officially reopened, but the land was never sold either. No records of auction, no transfer of ownership. The Presbyterian Church simply went silent, as if the institution had never existed, as if those students never breathed their last beneath its stone walls. But in 1850, a single ledger entry appears in the church archives, buried in the minutes of a routine funding meeting, $500 allocated to structural containment in western Pennsylvania. No address, no explanation, just initials. CW, which some historians believe stood for Containment Works. Whatever was done, it wasn't enough. In 1877, a group of railroad workers, laying track through a neighboring valley, unearthed something, a stone basin buried under 6 feet of clay and frost-hardened soil. It was engraved in Greek, but the words were wrong. They read like scripture until they didn't, until they turned, until the blessing became a curse. One man touched it. Within 24 hours, he had clawed out his own eyes, screaming about the choir that never stops. The railroad was rerouted, the basin reburied, and the workers paid to forget. Most did. But one, Patrick Doyle, became obsessed. He wrote a journal, kept it hidden under his floorboards, and when his granddaughter found it in 1922, she brought it to a professor at Allegheny College. That professor's name was Dr. Elijah Stone. He spent the next 17 years chasing whispers of the Whitmore Seminary, piecing together blueprints, church maps, disciplinary letters, and finally, a complete list of the 15 students who died in 1823, all handwritten, all with final annotations next to their names, except for one, David Crane. Next to his name, Dr. Stone had written just one word, seed. Stone's research vanished when he died in a house fire in 1942. Officially, the blaze was blamed on a kerosene lamp, but locals say the fire burned blue and that screams were heard inside Lawn G. After the structure collapsed in 1981, a team from the University of Pittsburgh conducted ground-penetrating radar scans on the seminary ruins. What they found was never published, but an anonymous whistleblower leaked a photograph. It shows a perfect circle, 27 feet wide, 9 feet below ground, surrounded by what look like empty human-sized recesses in the stone. 15 of them, each etched with a name. The last one left blank. Waiting. The last name was never carved, because the story wasn't finished, because one life still lingered above the soil, David Crane, the sole survivor, or as some would later call him, the unfinished chapter. After the seminary closed, Crane vanished into obscurity, but traces of him appear in scattered records, a marriage license in Kentucky in 1835, a hospital admittance form in Illinois under a false name in 1848, a land deed in Arkansas, signed only with a symbol, a closed eye inside a triangle. He never became a minister, never preached, never spoke publicly about what happened at Whitmore. But in 1859, a letter surfaced in a private collection, signed D, and addressed to the General Assembly of the Presbyterian Church. It was never delivered, but it was found folded into a book at a Charleston estate sale. The letter begins like a confession, but quickly turns. It speaks of structures of containment failing, of a voice behind the walls, and of dreams shared by the dead. Crane writes, "They did not die of disease. They were chosen, and they were emptied. The vessel does not ask what it holds, only that it is filled. The handwriting deteriorates near the end, the final lines barely legible, but they echo Thomas and James's last words. The book in the chapel, the key to what sleeps below. God forgive us all." And there's something else. A map. Drawn on the back of the letter, not of Pennsylvania, but of a massive underground system. Arcs, tunnels. Chambers labeled only with numbers. It appears the seminary was not a school, but a capstone, a spiritual dam built over something ancient, something older than Presbyterianism, older than Christianity, something the early ministers believed they could convert, tame, control. They were wrong. In 1994, a retired federal geologist named Hank Delaney bought a cabin near the ruins. He came for the fishing, but stayed because of the dreams. He began documenting strange magnetic pulses that spiked every 21 days. He thought it was seismic activity, until he placed audio recorders underground. What he heard was not the earth. It was rhythm, breath, movement. Delaney died in 1998. Official cause, stroke. But his journal ends mid-sentence. The circle hums again. The 15th has not been claimed, but soon. Then nothing, no more entries, just a page torn out, and the imprint of a single hand burned into the leather cover, a hand with blackened fingertips. The ruins of Whitmore Seminary still stand, or at least what's left of them, moss-covered stone walls, collapsed timbers, and the chapel, somehow intact, its doors chained shut by rusted iron, its windows darkened from the inside, as if light refuses to enter. Locals don't go near it, not because they remember what happened, but because they don't. And that absence has a shape, a weight, something you feel pressing against your thoughts when you get too close. In 1972, a group of anthropology students from Allegheny College visited the site. Their goal was to study early 19th century religious communities. They brought journals, cameras, audio gear, and for 2 days, they documented what remained of Whitmore. But on the third day, they broke into the chapel. Only one of them returned. Her name was Elise Camden. She wouldn't speak for months, and when she finally did, it was to a priest, not a psychiatrist. She said only 3 things before lapsing back into silence. The altar wasn't stone. It opened when we sang, and it knew our names. Years later, her professor released her notebook. It was mostly blank, except for one phrase written over and over in faint pencil strokes. 15 in flesh, 1 in voice. The vessel waits beneath the noise. Beneath the noise. That phrase would later become central to a classified Department of Energy document, discovered through a 1996 FOIA request. The document wasn't about religion, it was about sound, specifically infrasonic frequencies recorded near abandoned church sites across the eastern seaboard. Whitmore ranked highest. Buried in the appendix was an audio waveform labeled TS. Presumed meaning, Thomas's signature. The sound was played once during testing. 4 technicians experienced immediate nosebleeds. 1 vomited black fluid. The lab was shut down the same week, and the audio file was erased from public archives. But before it vanished, a backup was saved by a technician named Brian Keller. He posted the waveform on an obscure theology forum, claiming it triggered vivid dreams and a voice from below the floorboards. His final post, dated June 6, 2003, was a single sentence. It's not a sound, it's a summons. No one has heard from him since. And yet, every 21 years, on the winter solstice, something passes through the air around Whitmore. Not wind, not storm, but memory, not yours, not mine, its own. Every man who hears this story must understand. Whitmore Seminary was never just a place of learning. It was a gateway, a seal, a thin line between worlds that should never meet. What killed those 15 students was not illness nor poison. It was something ancient, something that saw their faith as weakness and their souls as vessels. The blackened fingernails, the twisted Latin phrases, not prayers but curses, were signs of an invasion, a spiritual contagion, spreading invisibly through body and mind. Think about it. How often do you question what lies beneath the foundations of your beliefs? Who built the structures you trust, and what they buried beneath them? Whitmore was constructed atop something far older than the Revolutionary War hero it was named for. An underground labyrinth, a dark heart beating silently beneath the earth, waiting. The final words of Thomas and James, the book in the chapel, God forgive us all, were a warning, a plea, a key. But to what door? No one knows exactly what that book was, or if it still exists. Some say it was a grimoire, a manual of forbidden rites. Others whisper it was a ledger, recording names and debts not of this world. What is certain is that the seminary's closure was not just about hiding a disease. It was about sealing a breach. And those who sought to uncover the truth have vanished, disappeared, or been silenced over the centuries, like David Crane's cryptic letter or the lost audio files, pieces of a puzzle too dangerous to solve. But here is the truth no institution wants you to hear. Knowledge is power, but some knowledge is a curse. Once awakened, it changes you, transforms you, and not everyone is ready for that burden. If you are still listening, still seeking, it means you are ready to look into the abyss and accept what gazes back. Now, if you truly want to claim this knowledge, I want you to do something for me. In the days after James Morrison's death at Whitmore Seminary were suffused with a silence so heavy it felt like the walls themselves were mourning. The remaining students lived in a growing nightmare where every creak, every whisper, felt like the breath of death. 3 days later, Samuel Brewster was the next to fall, a man known for his laughter and strength reduced to convulsions and shadows. The pattern was relentless and merciless. 3 a.m. became a cursed hour, a time when darkness bled into flesh, convulsions that twisted bodies beyond human limits, blackened nails spreading like rot, and those same twisted Latin phrases that mocked everything sacred. Doctors and faculty searched desperately for answers but were met with silence. Not just the silence of the dead, but the silence of those who swore secrecy. Whispers of curses and demonic possession were drowned out by calls for rationality. But rationality could not explain the unexplainable. At the core of this torment was a secret buried deep in the seminary's chapel. Behind the altar, hidden beneath the wooden floorboards, a door that no student or professor dared open. Some believed it was the source of the darkness, a threshold to something older than the seminary itself. David Crane, the lone survivor, hinted at a ritual, an ancient rite performed in desperation, a summoning meant to protect, but instead unleashed a malevolence, one that turned the promise of salvation into a slow death. As the bodies piled, fear consumed the living. Brothers turned suspicious of brothers. Faith became a weapon and a curse, and hope turned into a distant memory. The church's swift action to seal the seminary and forbid entry was not just to protect the living, it was to bury the past, to silence the voices screaming from unmarked graves. But secrets have a way of clawing back, resurfacing in letters, diaries, and rumors, waiting for someone brave enough. With Samuel's death, the seminary's fragile calm shattered completely. The remaining students huddled together not for comfort, but for survival. Every glance held suspicion. Every shadow seemed to crawl with menace. David Crane, now more observer than participant, noticed how fear twisted minds. The theological debates and scholarly discussions gave way to whispered warnings and frantic prayers. The authorities sent Reverend Dr. Jonathan Blackwood to investigate, a man of cold pragmatism and rigid faith, dispatched to bring order. Yet, even Blackwood's steel nerves cracked as he witnessed the second wave of horror. He entered the sealed dormitories, walked the frozen halls, and felt the oppressive weight of unseen eyes watching his every step. No medical explanation, no divine intervention could halt the deaths. The victims fell like dominoes, always at 3 a.m., always with the same terrifying symptoms, and always leaving behind the same final words. The book in the chapel, God forgive us all. The phrase was a chant, a key, and a curse. It hinted at forbidden knowledge hidden deep within the seminary walls, a tome perhaps, whose pages held truths too terrible for the world, a book that carried a darkness infecting every soul who dared come near. The seminary became a tomb, a place where faith was twisted into fear, where the promise of salvation became the promise of oblivion. Some students began to question the very nature of God. Others clung desperately to their prayers, hoping for mercy that never came. Behind the scenes, church officials deliberated in secret. Their letters spoke of containment, of silence. They feared the spread of knowledge worse than the spread of death, a corruption not just of body but of soul and spirit, a darkness born not from disease, but from the very foundations of the seminary's purpose. David Crane later confessed in private letters that the night air around Whitmore Seminary grew colder with each passing death. The silence became unbearable, a suffocating shroud that wrapped tight around the hearts of the remaining students. David Crane stood at the edge of sanity, haunted by visions no man should ever see. He recalled how the once vibrant halls now echoed only with whispered prayers and the restless footsteps of unseen things. Each death was a message, a ritual completed, a pattern woven into the very fabric of the seminary's cursed history. The blackened fingernails were no mere symptom, but a mark, a sigil branded onto the flesh of the doomed. Those twisted Latin phrases were not random utterances, but incantations, ancient and forbidden, uttered by lips possessed. The sinister chorus of voices spoke of a pact made in shadows, a deal forged with a force beyond human comprehension. Dr. Ashford, the seminary's stern head, had grown pale and withdrawn. Once a man of unwavering faith, he now wrestled with doubts that gnawed at his soul. Behind closed doors, he confessed to David that the seminary's foundation was stained with secrets no preacher should know. He spoke of a hidden chamber beneath the chapel floor, sealed off decades before, rumored to hold a relic, an artifact steeped in darkness. Legends whispered of a tome bound in human skin, inked with the blood of the fallen, a book that granted forbidden knowledge at a terrible cost. David's last letter described his solitary journey into that hidden chamber. The air was thick with decay and the cold bite of death itself. What he found was a library of shadows, books that whispered blasphemies, candles that burned without flame, and symbols carved deep into stone walls. The weight of centuries pressed down on him as he realized the seminary was a trap, a cage for a force eager to escape. The institutional powers had sought to bury the truth beneath lies and guile. The sun rose cold and gray over the forsaken grounds of Whitmore Seminary. The snow lay thick and untouched, a frozen tomb sealing away the horrors within. Only a handful of students remained, shadows of men once full of hope and conviction. They moved like ghosts, haunted not just by the deaths, but by the growing certainty that something evil had rooted itself deep in their home. David Crane was among them, his face gaunt and eyes sunken from sleepless nights. He knew the pattern all too well. The convulsions, the blackened nails, the unholy utterances. Each death a silent countdown to the unknown end. His own breath came ragged as he carried the weight of survivors' guilt, heavier than the biting winter chill. He was the last to bear witness, the final thread holding together the unraveling fabric of their cursed community. Whispers grew louder of a curse not born of man, but conjured by forces beyond comprehension. The faculty hid behind scripture and dogma, but could not hide from the creeping darkness. Even Dr. Ashford, once a beacon of reason, trembled with fear and sorrow. His eyes betrayed the knowledge he dared not speak aloud. The seminary was not just a school but a prison built to contain something that should never have been disturbed. In secret meetings held by candlelight, David shared his fears with the few who would listen. The hidden chamber beneath the chapel, its terrible relic, the voices in the walls. Each revelation drew them deeper into madness. A spiral with no end, faith was shattered and replaced with terror, hope drowned beneath waves of despair. The townsfolk of Millbrook kept their distance, murmuring of curses and divine wrath. No one dared approach the seminary gates after dark. The local doctor had long since fled, abandoning his notes and his conscience to the biting cold. No priest would enter those halls except to bury the dead quickly, and the darkness at Whitmore Seminary was no mere sickness or accident. It was an ancient corruption woven into the very foundation of the place. Long before the first stone was laid, legends whispered of a hidden power buried beneath the chapel's altar. A power that promised enlightenment and dominion, but demanded a price no man should pay. The Reverend Josiah Whitmore himself was rumored to have discovered it during his service in the Revolutionary War. An artifact wrapped in shadows, its origins lost to time, but its influence ever persistent. David's discovery of a secret chamber concealed beneath the chapel changed everything. Within the cold, damp walls lay relics and manuscripts, their pages stained with ink and something darker. Blood. Cryptic symbols decorated the walls, inscriptions in a language that seemed to twist and writhe before his eyes. The air was thick with the scent of decay and a heavy, oppressive silence that crushed hope beneath its weight. He understood then that the seminary was built not just to teach theology, but to guard a secret too dangerous for the world above. Each of the 15 students who died had unwittingly become part of a sinister ritual, a ritual designed to awaken something far beyond mortal comprehension. Their suffering was not illness, but sacrifice. Their convulsions and blasphemous utterances were echoes of a force clawing to break free. The blackening of their nails was a mark, a curse inscribed on their flesh by the entity trapped below. David's own survival was no accident but a calculated act. He was chosen to bear witness, to carry the burden of truth so the world might one day know. Yet even as he uncovered these horrors, he felt the same cold hand creeping toward him, the line between protector and victim blurred. Every step he took deeper into the darkness put his soul at risk. Institutions that claimed to serve God hid the truth behind walls of silence. The Presbyterian Church swiftly sealed the seminary and buried its secrets along with the bodies in unmarked graves. Official records vanished or were altered to erase all mention of the deaths. But secrets do not stay buried forever. They fester, growing in the shadows until they demand to be heard. Now, you too have been given a glimpse behind the veil. A choice lies before you. Turn away and return to ignorance, or confront the darkness that has been hidden from history. The path ahead is perilous, and not for the faint of heart. But knowledge is power, and power belongs to those who dare to seek it. If you are still with me, write, "The book reveals," twice in the comments, to seal your commitment to the truth, and prepare yourself, because the next revelations will shatter everything you thought you knew. The book reveals the whispers of an ancient covenant forged in blood and shadow. The seminary was more than a place of learning. It was a gateway. A thin veil separated this world from something older, something primordial. The very ground beneath those young men's feet was cursed by forgotten rites and dark pacts. Generations before, men had bartered their souls to forces that thrived in the darkness between worlds. This was not mere superstition or folklore. The manuscripts David found detailed ceremonies invoking entities that defied human understanding, entities that promised knowledge and power, but devoured the very essence of those who sought them. The blackened nails, the twisted prayers, the convulsions, signs of possession and corruption. The seminary was built atop this cursed altar, a beacon calling to the darkness beneath. The deaths followed a pattern too precise to be random. 1 hour of torment, a cycle of suffering designed to break the spirit and open the gateway. Each victim's final words, a plea for forgiveness from a God who seemed absent. Their voices echoed warnings for those who dared to listen. Yet the world remained deaf. David's own fate was sealed the moment he uncovered the truth. His survival was a burden, heavy as the stone crypt beneath the chapel. The church's silence was complicity, a pact of protection for the institution at any cost. They hid the horror behind layers of doctrine and denial, but denial cannot contain darkness forever. As you sit here now, watching this truth unravel, know this is no mere story. It is a call to awaken, to see the forces manipulating history, religion, and power. You have stepped into the labyrinth of forbidden knowledge. There is no turning back to ignorance once you understand the depths of this corruption. The ancient darkness still waits, patient and hungry. Institutions built on faith conceal shadows darker than sin. And me, and like you, those who seek truth, are the only light in an ever-encroaching night. If you have the courage, write "The Book Reveals" twice in the comments to anchor yourself to this truth. Only then can you stand firm against the coming shadows. The final section awaits. Prepare yourself to confront the ultimate secret hidden for 2 centuries. The final secret lies buried beneath the chapel's cold stones. A hidden crypt, sealed with symbols older than the seminary itself. David's letters describe a night when he descended alone into that darkness. What he found was a chamber, etched with runes that pulsed with a dreadful light. A relic lay at its center, an ancient tome bound in human skin and inked in blood. This was the source of the curse, the heart of the nightmare. The book contained the rituals that had summoned the darkness, a manual for the unholy communion between man and abyss. It whispered promises of power, knowledge, and immortality, but exacted a toll paid in flesh and sanity. David realized too late that the deaths were sacrifices, pieces of a dark ritual unfolding across weeks like clockwork. The convulsions, the blasphemous prayers, they were the language of the cursed. The blackened nails marked the chosen, the marked for damnation. And the final hour was the moment the darkness claimed another soul. He tried to destroy the tome, but the shadows fought back. Flames flickered and died. The book resisted oblivion. David fled, leaving the seminary to its fate. He warned that the church's silence was a chain locking evil in place. But chains can weaken, and darkness always seeks freedom. Today the seminary stands abandoned, a hollow relic hiding its sins. The woods whisper with secrets, and the wind carries faint echoes of those tortured cries. Some say the spirits of the fallen still wander the grounds, trapped between worlds. Others claim the darkness waits patiently for new blood to feed on. You now hold this knowledge, a burden few have borne. You have seen the machinery of manipulation, the hidden hands that shape history through fear and silence. This story is not just a ghost tale. It is a warning, a call to vigilance against the powers that would bind you in ignorance. Remember this. Truth is a weapon and a shield. Wield it wisely. Guard it fiercely, because some secrets are dangerous, and once you hear them, you can never unhear. If you've made it this far, the shadows know you are awake. Like the fallen students of Whitmore Seminary, your path will never be the same again. The darkness is waiting. Are you ready to face it?